to touch. It's not that hard to do. Charles Swindoll, a pastor who writes all kinds of devotional books and things, and has been a bestseller author for many, many years, as well as a pastor, tells of a time that he was really busy, and he came home one evening after a business trip, and his young daughter was waiting at home for him, and said to him, "Daddy, I'll tell you something really, really fast." And he looked at her because he figured there was something not quite right about that, what she said. So he said, "Well, you can tell me, and it doesn't have to be really, really fast." And then his daughter said, "Well, then listen slowly." Now you all understand listening slowly, because we do it so infrequently. It's just the pace of life. We are busy, and we're on the move, and we're on the go all the time. And I suspect that if we tried to count all of the conversations that we've had just in the last month, where we were talking fast but weren't listening slow, how many of the significant parts of the conversation we really, really missed. And not at all unusual for that to happen in our lives. You know, in our culture today, basically we are consumers. And because we're consumers, we have to accumulate stuff so that we can then go and consume via our purchasing. We are economic, political, and philosophical animals, and consumerism is the name of the game today. And you realize, of course, though none of us are old enough to remember this, but we heard it all from our grandparents, that consumption was a disease. Somewhere back in the 1900s and early 20th century, people died of consumption. I'm not sure exactly what that is anymore, but I remember my grandmother talking about neighbors and friends and relatives dying of consumption. Well, when you think about that as our basic economic philosophy of life, we are all dying a little bit because we are consumptive. We have a disease. And because we are consumptive, we have to keep moving and moving and moving so that we can keep up, so that we can consume. It's the way we live. I was talking to somebody in the last few weeks who just was on, as she put it, on her last nerve. She was just running. And she was commuting. And the bus ticket rates went up again. And she had to get home in time, but they're changing the bus routes now, or the bus schedule, so she's going to be late getting home, so she's not going to be able to get her kids, she thinks, to the soccer games and the baseball games and practices and things like that. So she's constantly trying to juggle balls, and she has no clue how she's going to do it. And what is she supposed to be doing? Because she's always busy, and she's always running, and she's always tired, and she can't get her kids, and she's got to get somebody who she doesn't know very well to take her kids. It's exhausting. And she's exhausted. And in the midst of that exhaustion, that is where God's grace meets her. In the ordinary circumstances of life, a way of living becomes a prophecy and a prophetic voice, asking her the question, what am I doing? And why am I doing it? A question that is very rarely asked and very infrequently passes our lips. Why am I doing anything like this at all? What's the point? I was reading a brief article, and there was a quote by somebody who I cannot remember. She said this, "See, the human mind is kind of like a piñata. When it breaks open, there's lots of surprises inside. Once you get the piñata perspective, you see that losing your mind can be a peak experience." And this is what happened to this woman. She began to lose her mind. And it became a peak experience precisely because she began to see that in the ordinary events of the day, that is where the graciousness and the presence of God met her. Not unlike any of your experiences or mine. It's in the ordinary events of life that God is normally going to do his work. Of course, we're moderns, and we're looking for the supernatural experiences that are going to fix things, right? Quick, fast, efficiently, and productively. We look for the quick fix. And when there is no quick fix, our faith is challenged, our hearts burn within us in a bad way, and we sort of lose hope. And so we have generations of people who are losing hope and losing focus and losing, frankly, the gospel, the good news that Jesus is present in their lives daily, every single day, in a multitude and a variety of ways. Look at, in the gospel reading this morning, what Jesus was talking to adults about in his generation. He was saying pretty much the same thing. We played the flute for you, but you didn't dance. We wailed and cried, but you didn't mourn. In other words, he was telling the people there, which is what really got him mad, by the way, you are oblivious. You're missing everything, and you don't even know it. How much you're missing about the grace and nature and beauty that God gives to us day by day. And that's why Jesus then says, yeah, you're going to be oblivious to me, which most people were, right, when he was alive and on the cross and everything else. People were pretty much oblivious to him. He was not a big hitter. Okay. And that's why he said that wisdom vindicates herself. And that is exactly what has happened to Jesus, that he has been vindicated because he's been shown to be true, real wisdom. The other thing is, a lot of times we look, when we're trying to repair our lives or we're giving thought to how we're going to live in the future and the decisions that we have to make, a lot of times we miss the ways in which God is working in the ordinary events of our daily living. Look at some of the things that he taught for advice, just for advice. He said, don't worry about tomorrow. Oh yeah, that's really easy. That works for me. For all of us. We're not going to worry about tomorrow at all. We're not going to get nervous and jerky about tomorrow at all. But we do. And so we miss today. He says, God loves you more than he does the sparrows. Now, it's not that he doesn't love the sparrows, he does, but he loves them in a different fashion than he loves you. And that is always a heartening thing for all of us, to know that we are loved and that the world, that big world we live in, actually has an affinity and a regard for you because of God. And the other piece, of course, is an obvious one, why Jesus made disciples. He was trying to teach them, as we try to learn, how to put flesh and bone on our faith, right? I mean, you realize that you can say you have faith all you want. You can talk the best game in the world, but until it's in your flesh and bones and you're acting it out in your daily life, it's just you're blowing smoke. Mostly at yourself. I was talking to somebody, a young lady, again, a few weeks ago. I'm masking her. I asked her if I could use this story in the early one, so I'm masking it. But she had been job hunting and was having dismal results, absolutely dismal results. And it finally dawned on her. She called a while ago and said, I got a job. I said, all right, way to go. How'd you get it? She said, I was myself. I said, oh, really? You were yourself? What do you mean? She said, I realized that I was so afraid of being judged by other people going in to interview for a job. And I was so messed up about perfection. Okay, now modern Americans, listen up close on this one. We are all perfectionists because it is the way our culture works. To be consumptive, you have to accumulate. In order to accumulate, you have to have no weaknesses or can admit to none so that you can have the air of perfection and do it all, productivity, etc. ad nauseum. And she said, I finally realized that I was trying to be perfect. And because I was being so perfect in my interviews, I wasn't human. I wasn't being myself. I wasn't being normal. And so all I was doing was talking about all of the things that I'm imperfect about and all of the things I do wrong and all of the things I don't know how to do in my interviews, and that stuff was coming across. I was trying to hide that I wasn't perfect, and it didn't work. And so I didn't get any jobs. But then I finally realized that what people are looking for is for you to be honest. And so I was honest, and after a couple of interviews of being honest, people still said no, and it hurt my feelings, but somebody said yes. Now you might not think of that as what Paul is talking about, sin. However, that whole description is a good description of the way sin works. It begins to plunder you just a little bit at a time because you can admit to no imperfections. And by doing that, then, it will build up your sense of yourself to the point where you no longer resemble who you really are. And pretty soon you forget who you are and you try to become something else. And so you start researching. You read all of the books, you read all of the economic books, you read all of the philosophical books, you read all of the psychological self-help books, you read everything in the world to try to figure out who you can be that will be socially acceptable. But little by little you start to lose yourself. And that is why Paul says that sin is a law. The law of sin. He's not talking about individual actions so much as just saying, as I mentioned last week, that we have a propensity to screw things up. And that has to do with the fact that we live in the midst of sin, questioning our own worth and our own value. And at the points and occasions when you begin to do that, that is where you begin the downward slide. I was talking to a family again who said, okay, I could say that I could talk about this, who's just one of the family members is big time into drugs. All right? Start with prescription pills and then they got too expensive. And after the pills got too expensive, you start to go and do something cheap. Well, what's on sale these days in the Poconos, people? Oh, don't even tell me you don't know. What's on sale on the street today? Heroin. That is correct. And that is what people are using because it's cheap. It's on sale. It's consumerism. And because it's on sale and you need more, the family ended up, as every family will, unless it's cut off, in disaster. Emotional disaster and economic disaster. You cut off from friends and from family, and many of you know just what I'm talking about, and you end up in a disaster. And pretty soon you look for the grace of God, and you don't see the normal daily pieces of grace, and you look for a supernatural intervention. And there's no supernatural intervention that is going to come. It's going to come mostly through the ordinary events and means of God's grace. But this is how God works. And this is the gift that you and I have been given when we're talking and thinking about repairing our own lives in whatever fashion or need we have to repair. The first place you want to be in this is to decide what kind of day you're going to have. That's the very first thing when you're thinking about how you're going to repair your life. You want to decide what kind of day you're going to have. You remember what Martin Luther always said? He started every morning, every single morning, get out of bed and would say, I am baptized. Now understand, for Luther, baptism meant more than just getting water sprinkled on your head up there at the baptismal font. For him, he understood it as an act of Moses crossing the Red Sea out of slavery into the freedom of the Promised Land. And so that is when he said, I'm waking up today. I am not a slave to the law of sin. I am not. I am free. And I'm going to live that way. So even with all the stuff Luther went through, horrible, horrible stuff, he was able to wake up every day and decide what kind of day he was going to have. You know, that's what I do too, every single morning. I get up about the same time, make a cup of coffee, sit down, I get my journal out, and I start journaling. Somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes. Every morning. And then I decide what kind of day I'm going to have. And if I decide I'm going to have a lousy day, you'll know.
You'll call somebody.
I'll call somebody, make your life miserable just for fun. No, I wouldn't.
Wow.
But, you know, I mean, I said, this is, okay, this is a footnote to that whole thing. So, in the science, in the laboratory, somebody did a study on yogurt. And yogurt's response to people's emotions. I've never heard of such a thing, but I checked it out and looked it up, and they've been repeating it in experiments all over the country. Yogurt reacts to your emotions. If you're, Freddie, you look like you, oh, you do. If you're in a good mood and a good frame of mind, the yogurt is very perky, right? I don't know exactly what I mean by that, except that it does.
I don't know. How you go?
That's because it's like a mood ring. It's perky in there.
It's perky in there, not in your belly. It's perky in the container.
Oh.
And if you come in and you have a cloud over you, the yogurt just sits.
It's a living organism. It's live
Yeah.
culture. Yeah.
It's
responding.
It's responding to the environment, and it's a living organism. Thank you. That was well said.
So you might turn blue, green, or red.
But when you're talking about repairing your life, to see the presence of God in all things, even a 5-ounce yogurt, is to be saying something that's going to help you to repair your life. Because you're going to see that God provides resources and relationships all around you in ways that you may not always understand or perceive. But this is how God works in daily living. A variety of means of grace is what we call it in the Lutheran Church. So the first thing you want to do when you're in the midst of repairing your life is you want to decide every day what kind of day you're going to have. And I really mean that. You decide what kind of day you're going to have every day. Another thing that you need to be doing, which you can see Jesus did all of the time, he adjusted his day. When you just read some of that stuff, he adjusted his day to the needs of the people and the crowds and environment that he was in. That's another thing that you'll need to do when you're beginning to repair your life. Realize that there will be adjustments that you have to make to the day and fit yourself into it, and the adjustments into your life, which is the spiritual gift of self-control. something we Americans don't talk about very much, but self-control really matters. And you're able to do that when you decide the kind of day you're going to have, and then fit the people, events, and circumstances within that context. The other piece, of course, is that you want to learn something every day. All right, that keeps you focused outward, away from yourself. That's called in the Bible wisdom, right? It can be a practical wisdom or something a little more esoteric, like yogurt reacting and smiling at you when you open it because you're in a good mood. You want to do something specifically good every day that is outside the normalcy of your job description or your normal life habits. Do something good just for the sake of doing the service for somebody or something every day. The other piece, of course, in addition to service, is you just want to have a spirit of generosity. And by that I mean you want to cut people some slack. You realize that sin is a law, and that we're always going to be in a position where we're going to sin. I mean, how many times have you said, and I have certainly said things, in the wrong time, the wrong way, the wrong place, in a wrong frame of mind, and gone back later